Since it's now 7:30, Les, so we can officially start the meeting.
Okay.
And I can say that as far as I know, we have an arrangement with the museum to start meeting again at the museum when we decide that we would like to do that. As I'm sure some of you can appreciate, there is some concern about having meetings in person at this point in time, and especially with the uptick in the number of cases at this particular moment in time. And it's quite possible that if things do change significantly, that the museum may be forced to change their policies, and if drastic measures have to be taken, the museum may actually close. So at this point, we may have an in-person meeting in May. We may not. So I have no announcements to make other than Traxa Guide has been received by the printer. It has been sent out to everybody who pre-ordered it and to all our dealers across Canada and into the United States. And we have just over 100 left. So if you have not ordered it, I wouldn't wait too much longer because we expect it to sell out probably in about 2 or 3 months' time. Other than that, I have no announcements to make, and I will turn things over to Les to introduce our guest speaker, and welcome, Robbie. It's nice to see you again. We'll looking forward to an update, and thanks to the people who are joining the meeting and not watching our Ottawa Senators play your Montreal Canadiens, Robbie.
Oh, didn't even know they were playing.
Yes, and I understand the Canadians are winning at this moment. But anyways, over to you, Les, and thanks, Robbie.
Okay, well, just to add a little bit to what Dave was saying, is the next meeting is going to be a Zoom meeting. Speaker will be remote, so even if we could get back into the museum between now and summer, there will be Zoom meetings. Anyway, I'd like to introduce our speaker tonight, Robbie Robertson, and I'll just read a little bit that Robbie sent me here. He's a bilingual native of Montreal with degrees in engineering from McGill and an MBA from Concordia. His career, he spent 35 years ups and downs with the Otis Elevator Company in various engineering, sales, management positions, including 10 years out of Canada in roles in Australia, South Africa, and United Kingdom. He's a lifelong railway enthusiast. He began volunteering at Exporail on his retirement and later joined the board of directors, both the Canadian Railroad Historical Association, the owner and operator of Exporail, and the CRHA Foundation, which he became president in 2018. He became president of the CRHA itself, where he heads the board and executive committee. In 2019, he became a member of the board of Heritage Rail Heritage Rail Alliance, the North American Tourist Train and Railway Museum or organization, where he is vice president for Canada. So that background there, I'm looking forward to a really interesting presentation, and somewhere I haven't been for quite a while and have to go to. So Robbie, over to you, and tell us about Exporail.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Les. Thank you to you for inviting me to do this presentation tonight. I'm delighted to be here with everyone and to see 73 participants. That's pretty good. Nice audience. I'm going to share my screen here, and hopefully you can all see this. How does that look? Okay.
That's better. Yep.
Good. So, okay, so I'm going to talk to you tonight about the Canadian Railroad Historical Association and what we do, and our museum and our publications and all that sort of stuff. And I hope you'll be interested in seeing it. And for those of you who have never been there, it'll be an interesting tour for you. And for those of you who have been there in the past, I hope that you'll be able to come back and see us again sometime. Our museum is open. We have been following on all of the rules that are here in Quebec and Montreal. Closed, we've been closed part of the time, but open other times. And so our number of visitors is starting to go back up again. People are starting to feel a little better, although as we all know, the mask mandate in Quebec hasn't been removed, and so we're all wearing masks when we go to the museum. But it's there, and we intend to operate this summer, and we're looking forward to a good time. So I hope that some of you will be able to come and see us. I want to start off by talking about the CRHA, the Canadian Railroad Historical Association. And because it just turned 90 last month, the first meeting of the CRHA was in 1932 in March. And this, what you're looking at, is the sign-up sheet for the folks that turned up for the first meeting. There were 15 attendees, and they wrote on the top of it that the purpose of the CRHA was to preserve the records of our early railroads and locomotives. The first railway in Canada, you'll probably remember, was in 1836 when the Champlain and St. Lawrence Railroad went into operation. And so in 1932, these folks were already looking ahead to the centenary of railway operation in Canada. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the future. But you can see there were a whole bunch of Montrealers, but there's even one person here who's from Elm Street in Ottawa. Already we have a mixture of francophones and anglophones who are interested in railways and who built the association that we have today. A few of the history of the CRHA was established in 1932 and incorporated actually in 1941. So it became a Canadian corporation at that time, and it's the oldest railway heritage organization in Canada. We currently have about 800 members. They're all across the country, and some of them are, we have a number of members in the US and a few overseas as well. In 1937, the organization began collecting small objects and documents and books and paintings and started publishing a newsletter. So it was already starting to become active at that time. And then when equipment started to become redundant in the railway scene, and the first piece of equipment that was acquired was a Montreal streetcar, number 274 in 1950. At that time, the CRHA had no place to put these things, so they borrowed space at industrial sidings and started on the road to collecting. The second vehicle they got was the Van Horn's business car, Saskatchewan, which was used at the time of the construction of the CPR Railroad in the 1880s. And we still have that today, and I'll show that to you in a short while. The number of pieces was growing, and as a consequence, the association decided, that they should create a museum, and they started looking for land because, as I said, they were using industrial sidings to store the equipment. So they decided to create a museum, and then they made the actual decision to found the museum in 1961, and they found some land in Delson, Quebec, which is in the south shore of Montreal. And it was land that was owned by Domtar, which had been land where they did the treatment of railway ties. And in fact, it subsequently morphed into Stella Jones, and they're still there, but we got the first 10 acres at that time. So the museum opened to the public in 1965. It's in Delson and Saint Constant. The town line between the two towns runs through the middle of our site. And at that time, we had 25 streetcars, because basically the Montreal Street Railways, when they went out of business in 1959, gave us their historic streetcar collection. We had 20 steam locomotives and 5 passenger cars. And in 2004, as the collection kept growing and growing, they built a new building, which we call the Angus Pavilion, and rebranded the museum as Exporail, which is the brand name under which we operate and show to the public. The other main project beside the museum that the CRHA has is the magazine Canadian Rail. Here you see the cover of the January-February issue, which is the March-April one is at the printers now, but the Jan-Feb one is come out, and it has a complete story of the new rapid transit line, or the light rail line that's being built on the in Montreal, called the Réseau Express Métropolitain. And Ian McDonald's done a wonderful job of photographing what's gone on, giving the history of the development of this project. It's a very interesting article. So the magazine is bilingual. It's published 6 times a year, and it follows on the stream of publications that the CRHA has been doing since 1937. So the 600th issue of a CRHA publication came out in January of last year. So we're up to this particular one you're looking at is number 606. If you're a CRHA member, then you get the magazine automatically, and you can also subscribe to the magazine. It's an entirely volunteer production. There's 20 volunteers who are closely associated with doing this magazine. And the magazine's always looking for stories, always looking for material and photographs and so on. So if any of you have ideas that you think could be turned into a good magazine article, historical, on anything to do with railways, including urban transit, the editors would be glad to hear from you, I'm sure. And if any of you haven't seen the magazine and would like to, I'd be happy if you got in contact with me to send you a couple of issues of it so you could look at it, in the hope that someday you'll turn into a subscriber. The there's an inaugural price for first-year members of $40 a year to get the magazine, and it's $50 normally. That includes the taxes. So anybody that would like to get a couple of issues of the magazine, send Les can put you in touch with me, and send me your name and address, and I'll be happy to send you a copy of the magazine, because it's quite worthwhile, and it covers a broad spectrum of railway topics right across the country, from Newfoundland to BC. The other thing interesting about Canadian Rail is if you go to the Exporail website, you can access back issues of Canadian Rail in a PDF format. So you can read all of the issues of Canadian Rail, which have ever existed, going back to 1937, except for the most recent 2 years. So to interest people in subscribing, we don't scan the last 2 years, but everything else is there. And so it's a great opportunity to do research on railways if you want to read what's happened in Canada and railways. Our other major project is the museum, the Canadian Railway Museum, which we call Exporail. This is the front door of the Angus Pavilion, which is the main building of the museum. And in the top left corners, you can see 2 seals that we've got on the door. One of them is the Quebec Museums Association certification that we're a recognized certified museum in Quebec, which means we have to jump through all kinds of hoops, fill out all sorts of paper, make sure that we do all sorts of things right. But it's worthwhile doing that, because Quebec gives us some pretty hefty subsidies to operate the museum. So as an accredited museum, that gives us good status. The other one that's there is the Excellence Award for 2021, which we got from the Quebec Museums Association for the new permanent exhibit that we put on. This is very prestigious to get this award, and it was given to us at the conference in September last year, which was attended by our executive director and the Minister of Culture from Quebec and a number of other dignitaries, and it's got lots of good publicity, and it recognizes the true excellence of the museum. The museum is, Canada's National Railway Museum, and this is an extract from a report at the House of Commons from the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage, which recommended in 2007 that the government designate Exporail as Canada's National Railway Museum, and the House of Commons voted to do that. So we've got recognition by the House of Commons that we are Canada's Railway Museum. Unfortunately, the government of the day, which was the Harper government, actually never never went ahead with this. So even though Parliament, the House of Commons, recommended that we be the National Railway Museum, the government has actually never recognized us, despite great efforts on our part in order to get them to do that, including welcoming the Canadian Heritage Ministers. The current Canadian Heritage Minister is Pablo Rodriguez, the handsome guy with the beard in the background, and he's been to Exporail, as have his predecessors, Melanie Joly and Stephen Guilbeault. We make the pitch to them all the time. They all sit there and say, yes, yes, this is a wonderful place and we love it. And we're really glad that you're Canada's Railway Museum. And then when we ask them for money, they say no. So we keep trying, but we do get some project funding from the federal government, but we don't get any operating funding for them. They've never given us any. And I think the reason is that they fund the national museums like Ingenium in Ottawa, and the Museum of Human Rights in Winnipeg and so on. And they don't want to get into funding private museums because I guess the door would open, and they think that many other museums would want money as well. But that doesn't stop us. We keep pushing them. I've had a couple of meetings with Pablo Rodriguez, including one where I went to Ottawa and sat across from him in the members' lounge in the House of Commons and tried to talk him into doing something. And they keep saying yes, but then the bureaucracy gets in the way, and eventually we haven't got anywhere. But we haven't given up. Our new marketing slogan is "À deux pas de Montréal." So it's just a couple of steps from Montreal, because a lot of people think, they say this museum's in Saint Constant. Where the heck is that? We never heard of Saint Constant. So you can see the museum grounds in the foreground here, in the left foreground, and in the background, the St. Lawrence River, across the river, the Mount Royal in the center, and downtown Montreal on the right. It's literally a half-hour drive from downtown Montreal over either the Champlain Bridge or the Mercier Bridge to get to Exporail. And we're reaching more and more people all the time through our advertising. Our audience is going up as we try and sell the idea of Canadian railway history as being something really important. When you look at where Exporail is, it's in the left center there, where the star is in Saint Constant. You can see it's only a couple of miles away from the Champlain and St. Lawrence Railroad, which was the first railway in Canada in 1836. The Champlain and St. Lawrence ran between La Prairie, which is on the south shore of the St. Lawrence River, and Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu, which is on the Richelieu River. And of course, the Richelieu River flows down into Lake Champlain, crosses the border into the United States, links up with the Hudson River, and eventually gets you down to New York City. So that was the route for moving goods back in the 1830s. There are rapids on the Richelieu River around Chambly, which makes it not navigable. So the Champlain and St. Lawrence River Railroad was built as a portage route to go between the two rivers to eventually get to Montreal. So our museum's just a couple of miles from the original right-of-way of the Champlain and St. Lawrence, which is still there today. It's part of the CN line. The locomotive that pulled the first train on the Champlain and St. Lawrence was called the Dorchester. And the fact is, nobody really knows what it looked like. And you see on the left here 3 drawings, sketches, all of them made by John Loy, who was the first president of the CRHA in 1904, 1916, 1927. And you notice all 3 of them have different wheel arrangements. So the top one's a 242, then there's an 040, then there's a 240. And the CRHA crest, the logo on the bottom right, has an 040 on it, which doesn't look like any of those 3 either. So nobody really knows what the heck the Dorchester looks like. But when the CRHA was founded in 1932, as I mentioned, it was leading up to the 100th anniversary of the railroads in Canada. And one of the first things they did was they decided to build a replica. So they took their best guess and they built a replica, which we have at Exporail today. And this is the Dorchester replica. It's the first thing you see when you walk in the front door. It's on a turntable turning slowly around, and it's it never operated. It was just a facsimile that was constructed, but it's an interesting piece of equipment. You notice that it's running on strap rails, so there weren't T rails in those days. They were wood runners with strap rails underneath them, and the plate that's on the side here, which says Dorchester, is also a replica, because years after the locomotive had been withdrawn from service on the Champlain and St. Lawrence, it was operating up in the Joliette area of Quebec, and the boiler blew up, and the locomotive was destroyed. But the nameplate, the Dorchester nameplate, was found 20 or so years later by a farmer tilling his fields up there, who turned it over to a museum in Joliette. And within the past couple of years, it's actually come to us. So we have the original Dorchester nameplate. It's not on this locomotive, but it is on display in the museum. So the first locomotive nameplate in Canada. Here's what's on the site. The Angus Pavilion, which is the building at the top, you can see, is in two parts. There's the big train shed on the right, and on the brick building in the front of it, which is the entryway, has everything else in it. So the museum building, it's 8,700 square meters. It's environmental. It meets museum environmental standards for temperature control and humidity control. And the train shed has space for 50 vehicles on 900 meters of indoor track. There's 12 tracks inside the building. The building has the permanent exhibit, which is the 50 vehicles that are in there. They're not all locomotives. But we also do temporary exhibits from time to time. And there's a temporary exhibit room. There's also a pretty extensive model railroad, a film projection room, our gift shop, a very major library and archives, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Some function rooms, which we rent out to people for meetings and training sessions and that sort of thing, and it helps us make a little bit of more money. We have reserve space, which is where all the small objects that we have are stored, and of course the offices as well. Outside and I should point out, it's too small. This building is too small. We have way too much stuff, and we need to do something about that. And I'll talk about a little bit more about that later as well. Outside the Angus Pavilion, there's 5 kilometers of operational track that we can run trains on. We are connected to the CP main line, but of course we never go out there. Although it does allow the possibility for things to be delivered to us and for us to put things out onto the tracks as well for CP to take them out. There's a 1.5 kilometer electrified streetcar loop which runs all the way around the property. This is the loop coming around here, all around there. We have 3 streetcars that are operational, 1 steam locomotive, 8 diesel locomotives, 3 passenger coaches, and I'll talk about the kinds of use we make of those in a little bit. You can see the turntable that's there, which is a manual turntable. We have an outdoor miniature railway, 7.25 inch gauge railway, which is in the woods up here, which is great fun for the kids to ride on. 2 historically accurate station buildings, where we have exhibits, one of which is down here. This is the Hayes station, and whoops, going the wrong way. This is the Hayes station, and the other one is out of the picture up here at the top. We have the 2 train sheds in the back, multi-track train sheds. They were the original train sheds that were built when the museum was first opened. So they were built in the 1960s. They are not climate controlled, and they really have had their day, and we have to do something about those, and I'll talk about that a little bit later as well. And we have a train maintenance shop here, a two-track maintenance shop where we do work on the equipment that does operate. So there's lots of stuff there. Once you walk into the front door and you pass the Dorchester on its turntable, you find yourself in the artifacts corridor. This is we have many thousands of small railway related artifacts, which are almost impossible to display in the main train shed area because they're overshadowed totally by the equipment. So we created this artifacts display to allow people to look at stuff on their way in. And they have, there's these television screens which rotate through archival pictures of various things. These are some photographs of what you see in this artifacts corridor. The top left one is artifacts mostly related to passenger rail. So there's, crockery and models of passenger cars and so on. The bottom left one is primarily directed at streetcars, urban transportation. The bottom right one is railway tools. So there's surveyor tools and malls and spike malls and all that sort of stuff. And the upper right one shows a lot of locomotive components. There's gauges and so on, as you can see on the back wall, lots of number plates and a few models, including a model of the turbo train in both VIA colors and CN colors. Once you get past the artifacts corridor, you're into the main train shed area where our vehicle collection is. And as I mentioned, we have about 50 vehicles available for display in there at any time. But CRHA has 190 vehicles in its collection. So a lot of them are in dead storage in those old train shed buildings in the back. And they are, one of the buildings is open to the public in the summer. The other one is not open at any time. It's just a reserve building. Some of our collection, the 12 locomotives or 12 vehicles, they're not all locomotives. 12 vehicles are on loan to other railway museums in Canada. A couple in BC, a couple in Alberta, some in Ontario, and some in New Brunswick. The collection has steam, diesel, and electric locomotives, passenger equipment, and freight cars, lots of streetcars, and a subway car as well. If you're up on the mezzanine looking out over the train shed area, this is what you see. There's 12 tracks and lots of wide open space to wander between them and look at all the locomotives and the passenger cars and the streetcars. Good photographic opportunities all through the whole thing. What you're seeing in this photograph is the new lighting, which was just installed a couple of years ago. It's all LED lighting, directional spotlights, which have been trained on to highlight the key elements of the various equipment. That's a project which got substantial funding from the federal government, as well as the provincial government and some other fundraising that we did in order to do it, because it was about a $350,000 project to change the lighting. It saves us a lot of money though on electricity, the LEDs do. There's themes for the space as you go down it. This first row down here is all urban transit, and you can see streetcars down here, an electric locomotive, the Montreal subway car, the observation streetcar, and so the whole row tells the story of urban transportation. This next row is steam era freight railroading. So there's boxcars and cabooses and so on. And you just sort of progress through the whole thing. There's rows of passenger cars. There's other rows of freight cars. So the whole idea of this thing is to tell the story of Canadian railroading and how the railroads influenced the development of Canada, how the technologies developed, how it changed, and give people a good sense of what was great about Canadian railroading. The museum is partially handicapped equipped. You can see here a stair lift that gets people up onto the upper level platform so that they can see inside the windows of some of the passenger cars. But not everything is accessible by handicap. Some of the equipment is open to inspection by visitors. Some of it is not. Some of the more fragile pieces we open occasionally on special days. They have monitors there to make sure that people don't abuse the opportunity to get into the fancy equipment. Some of the other things you can see are in the Angus Pavilion are things like this, which is there's 3 CN pieces in a row in front and center. The one on the left, 15824, is the first diesel rail car in Canada, which was its sister car 15820 ran across Canada basically without stopping, continuously right across the country in the 1830s. So it was one of the first diesel powered rail cars. The one in the middle is the last rotary snowplow that was built in Canada. It was built in 1928 at Montreal Locomotive Works. It's a CN piece as well, and visitors get the opportunity on occasion to go inside the cab and the boiler area and so on, and see what it was like to be inside one of these monsters. This is and we have some pretty effective video of rotary snowplows in operation, which can be which are visible when you're standing beside this unit. And finally, on the right, there's CN's 5702, which is the locomotive which had the largest driving wheels ever in Canada, which were 80 inches. It's a 464 high-speed passenger locomotive, which did the Montreal to Toronto run for a long period of time. A couple of other interesting pieces. The second car that the CRHA got was the Saskatchewan, which is the one in front here. This is a bit of a photoshopped photograph because the mountains that you see in the background don't exist. I'm not sure where they came from, but the Saskatchewan is a wood sheath car that was used by Van Horn when the CPR was being built. It's a remarkable, wonderful piece of equipment, also fairly delicate inside, and so it's only open to the public from time to time. But you know, it's got his office space, bedroom, the kitchen that's in there, a parlor. It's really interesting to see. The car behind it is the Canadian Pacific school car. This was a school car which ran in Northern Ontario in the 20s and 30s when the railways were running school cars under the Ontario Department of Education. These cars had, half the car was living quarters for the teacher and his family, and the other half the car was a classroom. And the railways would move this car every week from one siding to another siding, and which, you know, in these very remote areas, children would go to school, all grades, and would go to school in the car. They would stay for a week, get a whole bunch of homework. The car would then move on to the next siding, and typically in a 5 or 6 week cycle, it would come back to them again. So some of these teachers stayed on these cars for long periods of time, and there's some interesting books that have been written about these school cars and life on the school cars as well. So we have the school car as it was when it was withdrawn from service. So it still has all the furniture in there from the teacher's family, and the desks and the blackboards and the books and so on that were there from the kids when it was in use. This is a shot of the interior of the Van Horn Saskatchewan. This is the parlor at the back of the train, and you can see how you know, it's upholstered furniture and fine woodwork and so on. And so we only allow people into this car under supervision. But it's a remarkable example of the kinds of luxury that the railroad magnates had in the end of the 19th century. When they were building it, and even you can see in the back corner over here, there's a telephone that was rigged up at some point in the life of this car. So the furnishings and all this in the car are also all originals. Another famous business car that we have is the car that's named Canada. It was the business car of Charles Melville Hayes, who was the president of the Grand Trunk Railway. This car, at some point in its life, it got a steel sheathing, but originally it was a wood car as well. The interior of this car is also quite beautiful and remarkable to see the kinds of life that people were able to lead on these cars. This one we use for Christmas teas. At Christmas time, we sell the opportunity for people to sit in this car and have tea and crumpets and get a lecture and a tour of the car. And it's actually very popular. It's quite a great car too. It's also right at the end of the track in the pavilion. And so when we rent out space to organizations who want to have meetings and so on. They can actually use this observation platform at the back of the car as a podium for making speeches and lectures and so on, and that's also quite popular. The FPA9 diesel from VIA was one that we refurbished about 3-4 years ago. It cost us $50,000 to do this cosmetic refurbishment. It's not operational. In fact, it doesn't have traction motors because VIA stripped the traction motors on it before they gave it to us. But it's quite a nice piece of equipment as well to see what it was like in good passenger days on VIA as well. It has some of the interior equipment is available to be seen from time to time as well. And it's parked here in front of Barrington Station, which is the other authentic railway station that we have on the property. Barrington was a small village in southern Quebec, down fairly close to the US border. The station was built on the Canada Atlantic Railway in the late 19th century, and it was picked up and moved to Exporail. The actual station moved to Exporail in the 1960s after the museum opened. We use it for displays as well. There's people can go inside and see it, and here in the station agent's office, we do telegraph demonstrations. We still have people that can send Morse code, so you can send a message from here to the Angus Pavilion and go pick it up later and demonstrate to today's youngsters with their cell phones in their hands how communications went on in the past. The inside, we have the VIA Dome Observation Sibley Park. This one has an interesting story too. The park cars, as you know, were part of the Canadian train sets that CP ran. They ordered these cars from Budd in the 1950s, 1955, I think it was. And originally there were 18 of these park cars built. Every one of them was named for a Canadian park, and Sibley Park was an Ontario park. When VIA converted, CP wound up giving these cars to VIA, and then when VIA converted the fleet to head-end power, they decided to only convert 15 of the 18 cars to head-end power. They sold 2 others to American railroads, leaving them with this Sibley Park, which they graciously donated to us. Unfortunately, before they graciously donated it to us, they stripped an awful lot of stuff off it to make up the missing parts on their fleet and the 2 that they sold. So the interior of the car is a bit of a shambles. We've had the car now for 15 years, and we finally put together enough money to rebuild the interior, because we want to turn the interior back into the way it was, so that people can go aboard and see what it was like to ride a streamlined stainless steel train in the 1950s and 60s across the country. There's a lot of work to be done. It's amazing how much has to be done to fix this thing up. It'll probably take us a year or 2, but and we're budgeting $60,000 to do it. So including a lot of labor that's going to be done for free by volunteers. But it's a good-looking car. We've been after VIA for years to help us more, because CN and CP are both very good partners of our museum. They help us financially. They help us with donations. VIA as a Crown corporation has always been unable to give us money, and for a long time they couldn't even donate any equipment to us, although they finally did manage to donate the FPA9 that you saw earlier and this car to us as well. But we finally succeeded in getting the attention of a VIA president. Cynthia Garneau is the VIA president now, and she's probably really got her plate full with all the stuff that's going on with VIA right now. But she's actually coming to Exporail next week to see us for the very first time. We're going to get a VIA president inside our building, and we'll tour her through the inside of the Sibley Park and show her what needs to be done, and plead mightily for VIA's assistance in sourcing parts, and maybe they can help us in other ways too, lend us some labor or something like that, because there's an awful lot of work that needs to be done. Here's another view from the mezzanine, just showing the freight alley and some of the passenger cars as well. We have the Montreal Metro subway car. These have all been taken out of service now. These are the original cars that went on to the Metro in 1966, 67. And this particular car was the very first car that participated in all the ceremonies when the subway was opened in 1967. So this one where Montreal Mayor Jean Drapeau was in the window in the front with Cardinal Léger and a number of other dignitaries. The Société de Transport de Montréal gave us this car 3 years ago. And before giving it to us, unlike VIA, they didn't strip it. They actually put it into the shop, repainted it completely, polished it all up for us, put in some new fixtures, and delivered us a first-class exhibit on which we didn't have to do anything except hook up the electricity to turn the lights on. So it was quite a different approach to them. The repainting of the car was to the original Metro blue, because before they went out of service, they were in a slightly different blue color as well. And so you can see how kids love to get on board the Metro car as well, and to take a ride on that, pretend to take a ride on it. Another blue favorite piece that we have is the Dominion of Canada. This is a British steam locomotive, so it's one of only 3 pieces in our collection which are not Canadian pieces. But the Dominion of Canada has a special place in our heart. There's a story that goes with this one too, which was that its fellow A4, which was named Mallard, set the world land speed record for a steam locomotive back in the 1930s. And there was quite a fleet of these Class A4 units. Dominion of Canada was one of them. It originally had a different name because they were all named for birds originally, but then it was renamed along with some others with the names of the old colonies. So there was one name for South Africa, one name for New Zealand, and so on. The Dominion of Canada was withdrawn from service by British Rail in the 60s and was due to be scrapped. And a CRHA member who learned this was successful in persuading the British Rail that it would be a good idea for British Rail to donate the Dominion of Canada to the Canadian Railway Museum as a centennial gift in 1967. So that's what happened. They gave it to us. At that time, it was painted in the green color of British Railways in those days. And just to make the gift look a little nicer, they slapped another coat of green paint on it before they donated it, so that it looked kind of new. But it was it was a shoddy job of green paint that they did. CRHA was successful in convincing the Redpath Sugar Company to pay for the transport of this locomotive from Britain to Canada. And so we've had it on the site ever since 1967. About 9 years ago, I guess, 8-9 years ago, the National Railway Museum in York, England, approached us because they wanted to do an exhibit of A4 locomotives to celebrate the 75th anniversary of the setting of that land speed record. So 4 of the A4s that were left in existence were in England, and they were able to get those. And there was ours, and there was the one in the United States at the National Railway Museum in Green Bay, Wisconsin. And they came to us and said, would we be willing to lend them the Dominion of Canada so that they could have this major exhibit with all 6 of the existing A4s, the only A4s that were left. Put them on display in York for 6 months. And so we agreed to do that. And the quid pro quo for them taking the locomotive was that they would repaint it. So they were going to repaint the British Railways green, put it into better shape. And then someone had the brilliant idea, why don't we go back to the Garter blue color that it was when it was first named Dominion of Canada. And so we talked that over with the National Railway Museum, and they said, well, yeah, they could do that, but you know, they only budgeted to give us one coat of green paint. And so we raised the funds in Canada to allow them to repaint the locomotive to the way it had been, in the Garter blue. And they made some other changes to backdate it to the 1939 period as well. And we sent them the CP bell, which is mounted on the top, because none of the other A4s have a bell. But the Dominion of Canada had a bell, so now it's got the CP bell on there. It's also got a Canadian Pacific whistle on there as well, steam whistle as well. So it was quite the start of the show when they did their grand gathering of all the A4s. The National Railway Museum in York made a fortune in running that exhibit. It was a brilliant exhibit. Prince Charles showed up to open it, and we had one of the Bytown members, actually Andrew McDougall from our museum, went over there to represent Exporail at the opening and meet Prince Charles, and so it was a big success. And then they sent it back to us here in Canada, where it remains a very popular exhibit. The other British locomotive in the collection is the Woden, which is a Class A1X Terrier locomotive, an 060. It's the oldest locomotive in our collection because it was built in 1875. And the Terrier class were the models for Thomas the Tank Engine. So if you want to see, it doesn't have a smiley face on the front, but it's Thomas the Tank Engine in real life. This was also refurbished carefully by some volunteers, a few of them from Ottawa as well, who came to Exporail to help make this locomotive look as good as it does. The third non-Canadian locomotive that we have is a French locomotive, the Société Nationale des Chemins de Fer de France, and it is a very old locomotive as well in our collection. I'll talk a bit about the archives that we have, the library and archives. The smiling lady on the bottom left is our archivist, Mylène. She's a delightful person, and if you're ever doing any railway research, she's a fount of knowledge and has access to all sorts of stuff. This archives is also accredited by the Quebec government, by BANQ, which is the Library and Archives section of the province of Quebec. And they give us some funding as well to operate this. They give us $25,000 or so a year to help operate it, which is a drop in the bucket for what it takes to do it. But so this is the largest specialized railway library in Canada. We have over 12,000 books and periodicals in the library. And then in the archival section, we have 1,600 meters, linear meters of documents, over 200,000 maps and plans, more than 1 million images. And the jewel of the collection is the Canadian Pacific Corporate Archives, which we got in 2014. The CPR archives, we've managed to get them listed on UNESCO's Memory of the World Register as an extremely important piece of Canadian history. The CP archives are arguably the second most important private archives in Canada, after those of the Hudson's Bay Company, which are in Winnipeg, of course. So I'll just give you a taste of some of the stuff that's in the archives. This is a detail from a plan, which is 98 by 275 centimeters. So that's 3 feet by 9 feet. Drawing on linen from 1886, which shows the CP rail line out in Western Canada going from Port Moody to Hastings. And it's signed by Henry Canby, who was the engineer in charge of the project. And of course, Canby Street in Vancouver is named after him. And also by William Cornelius Van Horn, who was the vice president of the CPR at the time in 1886. And also interestingly, down here, if you see that it was examined and certified on behalf of the Minister of Railways by somebody named Trudeau. So there was a Trudeau back in Ottawa in 1886 as well. We have the Heckman photo albums. Joseph Heckman was a photographer that worked for the CPR. His job was in the early 20th century. They sent him across the country to take photographs of all the CPR infrastructure. So bridges, stations, you name it, tunnels, all the infrastructure. He wasn't worried about rolling stock so much, but he took photographs of all this infrastructure, and the photographs were mounted in these binders, which are very fragile, and they're the only copy that exists. There are no negatives. So there's no prints, no negatives, just this. They look like this up in the upper right-hand corner. They're kind of beat up because they're 100 years old, more than 100 years old, many of them now. They've been hiding in the CP archives for a long time. So to make them available for people to see and research, we wanted to scan and digitize all of the photographs that are in the Heckman albums. But because the bindings are so fragile, you can't put them on a conventional scanner, or you'll start breaking them up. So we bought this planetary scanner, which you see on the bottom left, which cost us $50,000. And it allows the scanning of very delicate equipment. This is one of only 3 scanners like this in the province of Quebec, and we actually found that other archives that have delicate stuff make application to us to come and use our scanner. So it's becoming a popular thing too, and we make the odd $1 or $2 off that as well. But those are the remarkable albums. The other issue with the CP corporate archives that we found is that they're chock full of photo negatives, which are on nitrate base. Now, the cellulose nitrate base was something that was in use in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And so there's a lot of photographs, over 10,000 of them we found so far were in the CP archives. The problem with the nitrate is it deteriorates over time, and it becomes very unstable. It's highly flammable. It emits gases, which can damage other archival materials as well. And so in order to deal with those, this is one that's fallen apart. Most of them, of course, haven't fallen apart. But so what we've done with them is scan them all first, so they're all digitized. Then they go into these special non-acidic envelopes, one negative per envelope, which then go into these boxes, which are then sealed and wrapped in this metallic paper after having been labeled, and then they're put away. They're stored, they're frozen in freezers in a fireproof room, and they're there if we ever wanted to use them. But of course, we now have a digital copy of them, so it's unlikely that we ever will have. But you can't get rid of history like this, so you just have to keep it. Because of the nature of the substrates and the flammability of them, the fire departments and the insurance companies insist that they be treated properly, that they be frozen, and we get checked once a year by the fire department to make sure that we're handling the stuff properly. We actually are still discovering nitrate negatives because we haven't been through all the CP archives yet. We've been steadily going through them section by section by section, and we're still finding more of them that we have to deal with. One of the wonderful things about the CPR collection, as well as the posters, there are over 800 posters in the collection, and they're marvelous pieces of art, and they evoke a different time in Canada. With folks sitting around smoking their cigarettes while they're watching their car get put into a special car, and the passenger with automobile plan, which CP had. So you didn't drive, I guess, from Toronto to Winnipeg. You put your car on the train and took the train. But they're wonderful, wonderful pieces of art. Most of them from the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, when passenger rail was a big deal, and promotion of tourism by the railways was a big deal as well. And then we have the one on the far right, which is an immigration poster. When they were, Canada was busy trying to settle the prairies in the early part of the 20th century. these kinds of posters were used to attract immigrants and show them how wonderful it was going to be able to farm on the prairies. There's an archival exhibition which our archivist put together, she's trying to encourage other people, young kids in particular, to become archivists, and shows what happens to how archivists deal with documents, and it's quite elaborate, So it goes from acquisition to description, which is describing what the document has, and then classifying it and indexing it, and finally putting it out to on websites and on platforms to make them available. The CRHA has a number of photograph platforms that are out there on the internet, which you can look at. Things for like a number of the hotels, the photographs of the hotels, like the Banff Springs hotels and the Algonquin Hotel, a number of other hotels, and steadily she's digitizing more and more and posting them out there. And there's lots of other photographs available on the web as well. We also have a collection of small objects, as I mentioned, the small artifacts, which is models and chinaware and silverware, toys, uniforms, hardware, works of art, furniture, and so on. These are just a couple of photographs of different things, but the pocket watch that's on the right, you'll see is pocket watch is engraved with the name of Charles Melville Hayes. Hayes, as I mentioned, was the president of Grand Trunk Railway. We saw his private car earlier, and he was instrumental in building the Grand Trunk and working on the Grand Trunk Pacific as well. And his unfortunate claim to fame is that when he was in England in 1913, selling bonds to raise money to finance the Grand Trunk, on his return trip to Canada, he was persuaded to take the maiden voyage of a new ship on the White Star Line called the Titanic. And Hayes went down on the Titanic, and the pocket watch that you see there was in his pocket, and that's how they identified Hayes's body the day after the Titanic sunk. The watch was given to the CRHA by the Hayes family 40 years ago or so, 40, 50 years ago. I'm not sure exactly when. And so it's one of our most prized artifacts. A couple of years back, 3 years ago, the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library in California did an exhibit on the Titanic, and they asked us to borrow Hayes's pocket watch to put on display. So because of the value of the piece, they paid for our curator to fly down to California and carry it down there. And it was on display in California for the length of the exhibit on the Titanic there, which is 3 or 4 months. And then I got to fly down to California to pick it up and bring it back to Canada. And when I got back to Montreal with the pocket watch, one of the customs guys said, this paperwork doesn't look right. There's something wrong with this here. And he sent me off to examination and to find out what was in there and why the paperwork wasn't what it was. And I started talking to this customs agent and opened up the box and showed him what it was, and he was absolutely amazed. And I told him the story about it. He said, "Oh, Exporail, I've been there with my kids." "Yeah, great." He says, "It's great having this thing come back to Canada." And he stamped the paperwork, and that was it. There was no more trouble after that. So the watch is back at Exporail. We do an awful lot of educational programming. There's school groups come through here all the time, where we try to tell the kids the story of technology development, Canadian railways, Canadian history, what went on. Kids from all the way from daycare through to high school come through, and we have the fellow on the right that's talking to them as our educational specialist, who's standing in front of the rotary snowplow and explaining to them the railway snow fighting strategies that went on. This is something that school boards encourage the classes to go out on field trips, and Exporail is a very favorite school trip for a lot of kids, because not only do they get to learn something, but they also get to ride on the miniature train and some of the other trains as well. We have thematic exhibits that we do from time to time, and the one that's on right now is on model railroads, and it's on till September 22. This exhibit came about because Pointe-à-Calière, which is one of the big museums in downtown Montreal, big history museums in downtown Montreal, decided that they wanted to do an exhibit on model railroads. And so they were, I don't know how they got the idea, but they did anyway, and they hired a museum designer to work with them on it. And he said, well, you know, if you want to do model railroads, there's only one place to go, and that's to Exporail. So they came to us, and we loaned them over 400 models for the exhibit that went on in Montreal, which worked out well for us because they did some cataloging and some restoration on the trains that we had not done ourselves. And when the exhibit was finished at Pointe-à-Calière, we got it back. So now we've got it in our museum right now, and we're hoping that we're going to be able to get it to travel to some other museums across Canada as well. This is something that when we put these thematic exhibits on, we try to share them with other Canadian museums, and we have one on some artworks right now, which is out in the Revelstoke Railway Museum. We're planning one on Van Horn, which we've already got interest from the Museum of the Canadian West out in Calgary. So, you know, we like to share the collection as widely as we can with the rest of Canada. At the museum, we have two films that run. These are 45-minute films, both of them made by Stephen Lowe, who is a Montreal filmmaker. Stephen did this Rocky Mountain Express, which is CP's 2816 running in the Rocky Mountains. And he did that in 2004, I think it was. And it's an outstanding IMAX film it's just brilliant. And Stephen also did the one on the trolley, where he filmed trolleys all over the world, but Toronto is featured especially. So an explanation of how trolleys saved the world. And the one at the top here is number 274, which is the Montreal Street Railways piece, which it was the very first piece of rolling stock that the CRHA collected back in 1950. Guests at the museum get to go on guided tours. And here the guide is inside one of the passenger cars explaining what it was like to ride on the passenger cars in those days. And of course, you can see one of the bunks is pulled down, the upper bunks is pulled down, and they show how the seats fold down into lower bunks as well, and explain what it was like to be a passenger on a train in those days. These are very well appreciated, and of course we have tours both in French and in English. The model railroad room has been completely built by volunteers. It's a lovely operating model railroad, and we've tried to represent many different sections of Canada on it. You can see in the back here some East Coast fishing port. There's the mountains and logging and all that sort of other stuff. And here we've got a downtown city terminal. And on the turntable is the Dominion of Canada when it was back in its British Railways green color. So we got a little bit of local interest in there as well. This is really popular with kids as well, of course. There's an exhibit for children, which is a hands-on exhibit dealing with railway safety. So it tries to teach, it aims to teach, safe behaviors around level crossings and safe distances from trains and how they can't stop on a short distance, and and all that sort of stuff. And it has, buttons for the kids to push to make selections of answers to questions and so on. They get to wear high visibility jackets and goggles and pretend that they're railway engineers. And it's very popular as well. This exhibit was paid for mostly by Canadian National, and they were motivated to do it after the terrible disaster at Lac-Mégantic, where they wanted to get the word out to the Canadian public that railways are safe, but also how to behave around railways. We have a diesel locomotive simulator. This is being driven in this photograph by Andrew McDougall, who's also a Bytown member, but he's a volunteer at Exporail as well, where you get to drive the train down the track and with it using a real control stand. This was donated to us by RSI, which is Rail Simulations Incorporated, which is a company in Ontario which manufactures simulators, which they sell to the railways themselves for training purposes. So it's popular with kids in particular as well. We like to keep up to date, and so when things are happening in the railway industry, if we can participate in it, we do. Pardon me. The top left photograph is of the Montreal Metro cars, the Azure cars, which were the ones that replaced the blue car, which you saw in the previous in one of the previous photographs. The Azure cars were one of them came to Exporail and stayed for 6 months so that people could wander through it and see what was coming. That was before they were actually put into service. And likewise, the one on the bottom is the new REM system, light rail system, which should be operational before the end of 2022, at least on part of the line. But the REM loaned us this mock-up for 6 months as well, so that we could show this to the passengers and they can wander through and understand what's coming and start to salivate a little bit and see where it's going to go. These are very popular exhibits as well. This one also has a elevator platform in the front of it here, so that we can get handicapped people up on board so that they can get inside as well, because the REM is going to be entirely handicap accessible. We run a couple of streetcars on the site. This is TSR number 8, which is an 1895 open air streetcar. Obviously, it only runs on nice days, but it's a very popular ride. So folks get to run around the site on it. There are the streetcar has 4 stops. So one of them is the Angus building in the front door. The next stop is to ride the miniature railway. The third stop is to go to the Barrington station, and the 4th stop is to go to Hayes station. And so this thing circulates on the days when the museum is open, on nice days when the museum is open. And we have a 1928 Montreal streetcar as well, which is an enclosed streetcar, which can run when the weather's inclement. You can see the kind of lineups we sometimes get for people to go on board and ride these things. These are wonderfully popular rides for not just rail fans, but ordinary everyday people who like to see what it was like to back in the day, and the kids love these things too. This is the miniature ride-on train, which is a 5-minute ride through the woods, across a couple of bridges and through a tunnel. And it's extremely popular as well, that people love to do this. This is popular at other railway museums too. They have one in Squamish, and they have one at the Toronto Railway Museum as well. We have 2 locomotives, one CN and one CP, and folks really enjoy riding on these things. We run a passenger train. This is the passenger train at Hayes Station. Hayes Station, named for the Hayes family, Charles Melville Hayes. The Hayes family actually gave us the money back in the 60s to build this station. And we have a legacy in our foundation, which pays for the upkeep of the Hayes Station as well. So this is just a short train ride. It only goes for about 1.5 kilometers, because that's all the track that we have. And pulled by one of our diesels. So people get to ride on the passenger train. We now have a new car for them to ride on, which is a gallery car, a two-story car, which is one that was withdrawn from Montreal Suburban Commuter Service. And the kids love to go upstairs on that and into the gallery and ride on that one as well. We use this train as well for our Christmas activities. So Santa rides the train and gives away small gifts to the kids as well, and ho-ho-hos with them. John Molson is our steam locomotive. This is a replica steam locomotive that was actually built in Japan in 1970, I think it was. But it's a 222 steam locomotive, burns wood, run by our volunteers. And at this stage, we don't have any cars for it to pull, but we're working on developing a car for the John Molson to pull, so we can offer steam train rides as well. So what we do with it now is we just demonstrate it maybe once a month through the summer, turn it on the turntable, hoot the whistle, we go back and forth, blow out lots of steam, and folks love to watch that as well. From time to time, we do diesel demos. As I said, we have 8 operating diesels. And so here's the Via LRC diesel coming around the corner. And folks love to also line up and watch the diesels go by. And when we do this, we usually run several diesels. So they get to see this, and then they get to see, you know, a switching engine and a number of different things as well. The museum couldn't live without its volunteers. So we have 140 volunteers. And they won the Canadian Museums Association National Volunteer Award in 2020. This is the first time the CMA has ever given the award collectively to a set of volunteers. Usually it's, you know, one person who's the, you know, the president of some museum somewhere who's volunteered. This is a fitting recognition for the guys who run our tramways and lay our track and welcome visitors. There's only men in this picture, but there are women volunteers as well that do lots of work at Exporail, and they're really great ambassadors for us. Unfortunately, as you can see, they all have gray hair, except for the one fellow in the trench coat here who is an active Montreal subway driver. Everybody else is retired. So the challenge of all railway museums everywhere is getting younger people to become involved. Our visitorship was on a steady upward trend. As you can see, like we had 50,000 back in 2012, and we got up to 70,000 in 2019. And then of course, COVID hit. And so it started to go down, and I haven't even shown you last year because it's probably down around 30,000 or something like that. It's much lower. But the museum is very popular, and if you go on TripAdvisor and ask it what the most popular museums are in Quebec, you'll find we're number 8 out of 576 museums in Quebec rated by the travelers. So, you know, a good spot to come and visit. The visitors don't leave without spending some money, of course, in our gift shop. And so we have lots of books and toys and branded merchandise to take away. And before the end of this year, it's going to be online as well, so that we'll be able to sell books across the country and gifts across the country as well. So what are we doing for the future? Well, this summer, we've got one of these VeloRail attractions coming. This is one of these bicycles on rail, where you sit and you pedal and your vehicle goes along the railway. So that's going to be available this summer. We've actually got the vehicle already, getting it ready. The streetcar ride has some mechanical and electrical improvements that are being made. We're coming up with plans for a second enclosed tram car, because we only have that one number 1959 that you saw in the photograph is the only one that's enclosed. The others are open air, and we want to be able to extend our season further, possibly even into the winter, which we could do. And then we'll build some period appropriate shelters to make it look like the 1930s in Montreal. We're developing a passenger coach to pull behind the John Molson. That's ongoing right now. We're starting to look for funding for it And the big project is something we're calling, at this point, calling Exporail 2.0, which is to rebuild the 1960s vehicle reserve buildings so that they come up to modern museum standards. And at the same time, expand our busting at the seams Angus Pavilion. So there'll be more exhibit areas, more place to store the archives, more place to store the artifacts, more visitor amenities, more things for visitors to do as well. This project is going to take us a number of years. We are probably looking at $30 million to do what we want to do. And the way costs are going up these days, it may even be more than that. So it's going to be a big job. We've already started to sell the concept to the Quebec government and the federal government because we're expecting that we're going to need contributions from them. We like to restore equipment from time to time, and I mentioned the Sibley Park where we wanted to do the interior restoration. So this year we ran a campaign to raise $180,000 for restoration. The idea was to do the Sibley Park interior, to do a cosmetic restoration of CN's 6153 locomotive, which is in not too bad shape, but it certainly needs some work. It's got some asbestos work that needs to be done on it, and then fix up the bodywork and paint it up and make it look really good. And then the third piece that we wanted to restore, we gave people who donated to us a choice. We restore this Selkirk CP 5935? Should we restore this tram car or this Roberval and Saguenay RS10 diesel? And the overwhelming selection was by the people who donated, and we got 190,000 in the campaign, by the way. The overwhelming favorite was the CP Selkirk. So that's going to be the next one we tackle. We got contributions from every province in Canada except Newfoundland. And we got one from Yukon, and we got about 10 contributions from the United States as well, making up this thing that people are really keen on seeing proper restorations of our history done. So that's my tour of Exporail. Thank you very much. I like to show this slide at the end. I always put it at the end of every fundraising presentation. When I'm talking to the governments or when I'm talking to the companies or so on, and I'm asking for money, because our future is our kids, and our kids are fascinated by railways, and we need the efforts of everyone in order to keep them all going. So that's me done. I'll turn this off, and we can go back to looking at each other, and I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Have you got anything from chat?
Yes, I do have a few questions. Now, I'll start out by saying that I've been having problems with my internet tonight, so you may already have touched on some of these a little bit, but I'll ask the questions anyway. What is in the reserve building? Can you give a little bit of a description of some of the vehicles that are in there? And also, will they ever be displayed, or were they some of the ones that you talked about just a few minutes ago in terms of wanting to restore some of them? Or do you rotate whatever's in the reserve building? Could you talk a little bit about that, please?
Sure. As I mentioned, we have 190 vehicles in the collection, and the Angus Pavilion only holds about 50. So there's another dozen of them elsewhere in Canada, and the rest of them are in our reserve buildings, and some of them are actually outside on the site as well. They range in condition from pretty good to pretty terrible. One of our reserve buildings is not open to the public because the equipment that's in there is not in condition to be displayed. In some cases, there's asbestos problems associated with it, and we can't allow the visitors to get anywhere near asbestos. So that building's completely closed off. The other building is open to the public. It has about 35 units, vehicles in it. And we do rotate them from time to time, but it's a huge logistical challenge and a big expense trying to change the exhibits. So we only do it every few years. Typically every 5 years, we may change some of the things. The point of the exhibits is to tell a story. It's not just to say, here's a locomotive, here's another locomotive, here's another locomotive. So the curators come up with a story of, this is the way urban transportation was, or this is the way the West was settled. And so the cars and the locomotives that are selected are done for that reason. They're picked out to tell a story, and the story goes together. So typically, out of the 50, we may change 15 vehicles at a time or something like that, and try to tell a bit of a different story. The restoration issue is a big issue, not just for us, but for many railway museums as well, because the amount of money that it takes to do a restoration is enormous. You can't do a restoration for less than $50,000. And for some of the steam locomotives that are in bad shape, you're talking $250,000 before you can do it.
Mhm.
So it gets done bit by bit by bit. And as and when we have the money to be able to do it, we make the selections of the kind of equipment that we want to restore. And then we would put it on display if we've restored it. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. We have another one. I don't know whether you know the answer to this. It looked in one of the photographs as though there was a copy of a group of 7 paintings in the parked car. Is that the case? And if so, is there a story behind that?
Yes, there is a story behind it. When it's not a group of 7 painting, but when CP ordered the 18 parked cars, they commissioned 18 artists to do paintings for the cars. So there were 18 different artists. Each one of them painted a scene from 18 different parks, and the cars were named after those parks, as Revelstoke Park and Jasper Park and so on. And the one that is in our car, the Sibley Park, was done by a Toronto artist whose name I've forgotten. She is the only female artist of the 18. A couple of the cars had group of 7 artists who did the paintings. There's actually a very interesting book called, this is the book, it's called Murals from a Great Canadian Train. And it's by Ian Tom. And it's all about the 18 murals and how they were done and so on. The murals are actually, the original murals, they were in the CP cars. They were, when the cars were given to VIA or sold to VIA, or however they were transferred to VIA, they were still there, but VIA took them out a number of years later. The original artwork is in the Science Technology Museum in Ottawa, in their archives, buried in the back of beyond in their reserves. The Science and Technology Museum has agreed to do a digital photograph of the Sibley Park artwork, which, as part of our refurbishment, we will put on display in the car.
Oh. Mhm.
All right, now Mark Walton is asking, now that STM has started retiring the MR73 cars, and the first one, 79501, has been returned to the Alstom plant in La Pocatière, will Exporail try to get the last car, 79782, when the time comes?
I don't know that I can answer that for you. We have a collections, what we call a collections committee. The CRHA has a collections committee, which is made up of 8 people, 5 volunteers and 3 professionals. They study what it is that we should collect. And our problem, as I mentioned, we're busting at the seams. We don't have all kinds of space. So we have to be selective as to what we take. We're trying to get an MR90 car right now. I think we have agreement that they're going to give us an MR90 car, but it's held up by the Quebec Department of Transport, who actually has to give a green light to this thing, and it's in political limbo. The other car we're trying to get right now is one of the Canada cylindrical grain hopper cars, which were created in the 70s, and which are also being withdrawn from service. So we're trying to get one of those. They're owned by the Department of Transport, and we're in discussions with the Minister of Transport about getting one of those, and it's all tied up in bureaucracy as well. You'd think they're scrapping these cars, and you'd think that it would be an easy decision to make and say, yeah, we should give one of those, to a museum. But it's taken them a long time. I guess they have to study the issue.
Okay, now, the next question is also about some of the collections that have been donated by people. You've already talked a bit about some of the problems that some of the equipment might have with asbestos and things like that. There is perhaps a feeling that donations are donated to your organization and never seen again. But given what you've said, I can see there could be some issues. Have you found that, excuse me, have you found that people wanting to make donations, the occurrence has dropped? Are people still, or organizations still wanting to donate at the same level they did, say, 1 or 2 decades ago?
Well, we're in conversation with the railways. We have good contact with the railways. As I said, because of space limitations, it costs you a fortune to collect. If you're going to put a vehicle inside a museum quality building, you got to figure at least $2,500 a foot of vehicle is the cost of that vehicle storage. So you got an 80-foot vehicle, you're looking at $150,000 is what it costs you to build the building, just to put it in. Oh. And I mentioned we were talking about a $30 million project. Well, that's going to create some space for some more equipment. But it is a problem, and we do make careful decisions. So somebody says, well, you should collect this diesel, which is going out, and we look at it. Our collections committee looks at it, and they have a whole set of criteria for how they evaluate what it is that we're going to do. Why do we want this thing? What story does it tell? How many of them were there in Canada? I mean, if there were only 3 of them in Canada, we don't want it, because that doesn't tell the Canadian Railway story. That is kind of immaterial. It's something that started, like you remember the rail power locomotives, the battery operated locomotives that came out 15 years ago or something like that. Well, rail power gave us one of those locomotives, but at the end of the day, we decided, well, it was not a successful locomotive, even though it was innovative, but it wasn't successful. There were very, very few of them. So we don't want to tell that story. So we actually scrapped the rail power locomotive. And we make those kinds of choices all of the time. So, we don't want it's not like you're collecting stamps where you can have, every different issue of stamp every year, or collecting coins. It costs a fortune to collect and to maintain and to look after. And so you have to be very, very careful in what you do. In fact, in many, if you go to a place like York in England, which is one of the best railway museums, or the Japanese Railway Museum outside of Tokyo, they have much smaller collections than we do. In fact, when I was over in Japan and talking to the curator of the museum over there, he was amazed at how much equipment we had. He said, how can you ever support that kind of equipment? And the fact is that the CRHA collected a hell of a lot of equipment back in the 60s without any plan for how to look after it, how to maintain it. And so some of it is, that's why it's sitting in building 6. It hasn't had any money spent on it, and it's rusting away. So we have to be careful.
Okay, and you talked a little bit about the library and archives, and you did mention that, or it sounded like you charged a fee for other organizations to use your scanner. What about access to the the other parts of the collection, the whatever they are, maps, schedules, whatever they are. If I wanted to do research, for example, would I have access to all that? Are there limits to what the ordinary person can access? If you have to be an archivist or a searcher, does one have access to digital copies of those very fragile things that have been scanned? Perhaps you could talk a bit about that.
Sure. Our intention is to make as much of the collection accessible as possible online, digitally. So we're working systematically at digitizing the collection and making it available. It's a huge job. And like I mentioned those Heckman photograph albums, that took one person 9 months to scan all the Heckman photograph albums. We were able to do that because we got money for the project from Library and Archives Canada. So we were able to do that, and ultimately that will be available to people. We do get a lot of researchers who are interested in Canadian railway history. If they want to deal with our archives, that you contact the archivist and you talk about what you want. We do not let people wander through the archives. Stuff goes walkabout when you do that, and it gets damaged. And in fact, is for something like the CP archives. CP had those archives, since forever. They had 6 people working on them, and we've done more work on them in the last 5 years than they did in the previous 20. With one person, because we're systematically going at it with a view to making them accessible. CP kept them, they would let some of their friends wander through, and for everybody else it was a secret. So we want to make them accessible. If you want to get information about something, you contact the archivist. Archival research costs money. So there's a fee schedule associated with it. Members of the CRHA get a discount on the fee schedule. The archivist will discuss with you beforehand what's involved. Does she think it's going to take 1 hour of work or 20 hours of work, and what it's going to cost. So yeah, the archives. The archives are a very important part of Canadian railway history, and we want to safeguard them as best we can. We were asking about donations before. We get tremendous archival donations, particularly now as there are rail historians and rail fans across the country who have extensive photo collections. And they get to the stage where they either have to downsize, or occasionally, they pass away, and then their family has this huge collection, and people come to us and say, "Would you like this collection?" Depending on what it is, it goes before. Well, it always goes before the collection committee. Depending on what it is, we either say yes or no. If we take the collection, some of them are so huge. That it literally is going to take an archivist a year to go through the things, right? So if that's the case, if somebody says, "Do you want, my 200,000 photo collection?" We sample the thing, we see what it's like, and we say, well, if we take it, we can't do anything with it for the next 20 years because we don't have the manpower. So some people have said, well, this, people, and particularly in the downsizing mode when they're still around, they say, well, I'd like you to be able to deal with this, and I'll give you $50,000 along with my collection so that you can hire somebody so that they can deal with the collection. Right now, our problem is we don't have room for stuff. We have archives stored in offsite in some other locations where they're not even accessible. We've just put them there for the time being till we are able to build some new space.
Okay. Any more, Felicity? Or?
Okay, so I just have one more.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, there was just one more. Jonathan saw a picture of an RDC Dayliner and was wondering if you could say something about that.
Yeah, we have two RDCs on the site. One of them is an RDC 1 and one is an RDC 4. They're both in pretty reasonable shape, although they're not open to the public. They're both parked outside. We don't have inside storage for them. They're both CP units. So I can't say any more about that than you can. If anyone has any specific questions about any specific equipment, through Les, maybe you can get to me, and I can find some answers for you from people. I mean, I could go look it up right now, but I don't want to waste everybody else's time on talking about it. But yeah, we have the two RDCs.
Okay. They were, excuse me. The question was, were there bunks in the parlor of Van Horn's car? Car.
Oh, boy.
Van Horn's car, Saskatchewan, had a private bedroom for him. So it wasn't bunks. He had his own bed and private ensuite toilet in there as well. And there was a small kitchen as well. There were no other bedrooms in that car. It's just his.
And then you mentioned that there were digital photographs scanned. Are they on the website? How does one access them?
If you go to exporail.org and look up archives, you will get some links to archival materials. You will get links to the Flickr albums, which have hotels and that sort of thing. Or you can just on our Facebook page, there are links as well to many of these things. On the main website, exporail.org, you will find the links to the back issues of Canadian Rail, all of which back from 1937 up to 2 years ago are scanned and available. So you can download all the issues that you want and read all of the articles that you want from that.
Okay. And Rob Smith asks, what is the working relationship like between Exporail and our Science and Tech Museum here with regard to the collection of railway equipment and artifacts? How does that work?
We have the other, when Les introduced me, he mentioned Heritage Rail Alliance, which is an American-based organization of railroad museums and tourist trains throughout the US and Canada. Anybody can belong to it. So we belong to it, and Ingenium also belongs to it. And Sharon Babayan, who's the curator of transportation at the Ingenium in Ottawa, is a member of the Heritage Rail Alliance as well. And she and I work closely together on HRA, and she and our curator also work closely together on sharing information and so on with regard to archives. So they visited us, we visited them. It's a good relationship.
Are any TV shows filmed at your museum? Someone thought that they might have seen the museum on a TV show called Are You Afraid of the Dark? Has it ever been used for TVs or movies?
Yes, we use the site fairly often for filming. There was one done just a couple of weeks ago by Paramount Pictures from the States. They were filming scenes which were supposed to be in Arizona. How we become Arizona, I don't know, but you know what these movie companies do.
Movie magic.
It's movie magic indeed. So yeah, we've done a lot of stuff for French TV, for French movies in particular, because they're in Montreal. We've done stuff for the CBC. We've done them for lots of other productions as well. It's a nice way to make some money, actually, because movie companies have lots of money. So we, for a couple, 3 days worth of discomfort as we shift stuff around for them and get out of their way and so on, we can make $15,000 or so. Not bad.
Is that it then, Felicity? Or?
Just the one last question is Exporail accessible by public transportation? How does one get there?
Okay, it's tough. you can, there are commuter trains that come out of downtown Montreal and stop a 5-minute walk away from Exporail. But they don't run, unfortunately, they're in the opposite direction to where you want to go. Like, so, you know, people who live around Exporail want to go into the city in the morning and want to come out at night, whereas people from the city want to come out and to visit Exporail in the morning, and there aren't a lot of trains. So, so you can do it, but you have to plan to do it. There are buses you can take from downtown Montreal as well, and but the easiest way is to get there by car. And if you're coming, like if you're in Ontario and you're coming from Ontario, we're, you know, just less than 2-hour drive from Ottawa. Highway 30, which bypasses the, you know, you come out of 417 and into Quebec on Highway 20, and then you get onto Highway 30. You don't even go near the downtown Montreal. You stay on the South Shore all the way. It's fast and it's easy.
I think that's it. We had a lot of comments saying it was a wonderful presentation, and thank you very much.
Well, yeah, I'd like to add to that, Robbie. I think just looking at the comments there, a lot of people agree it's a great presentation, and but I haven't been down there for about 10 years, I guess, to Exporail. Well, you've sparked my feelings. I should get there this summer.
We'd love to see you.
Number of times, as you say, on 30, I go past these signs that say Exporail on the way to northern Vermont. But should have to turn off in there one time.
You should. It's 5 minutes off Highway 30.
Yeah, but it's interesting, your pictures of Dominion of Canada, and you said it was across with the locomotive from, oh, what is it now? In the States there, museum there.
Dwight Eisenhower.
Yeah, I called in at that museum specifically to see that on my way back. Of course, it was in the UK at the time. Anyway, I'd like to again, thanks very much. And there'll be a gift on the way from to you from the Society. And I hope you enjoy your dinner and think of us while you're eating.
Well, I will, and it's been fun. I've enjoyed talking to you all, and your attention is the best gift of all. Merci beaucoup.